Our guest today is Ms. Dafina Gercheva, who is the United Nations resident representative in Armenia. That means she represents the UN in Armenia, all of the UN agencies in Armenia, and works specifically with and through the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP office, to do sustainable development, environmental development, social programs, and a million other things, I'm sure. And since we're not going to talk for the next 3 hours, let's please start talking about one of your most recent products, the Social Cohesion Survey, which we found very interesting. We're happy you did it, except that let me ask you maybe the obvious question. If we know, based on all of the statistical information, if we know that in Armenia the Gini coefficient is growing, the actual statistical difference in incomes and in lifestyles and standards between the rich and the poor are growing. Did we need a social cohesion survey? What did it tell us that was surprising?
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I'm glad you're here.
Let me immediately respond to your question, which is a very interesting one. Indeed, we are observing growing disparities over the past couple of years, in particular after the crisis hit the country during the last quarter of 2008. And indeed, the poverty is growing, and indeed, the inequalities are broadening. These are facts which are well known. However, the purpose of our research was not so much to look at the so-called social exclusion index or the level of deprivation among the different groups of the society, but rather to see how much individuals, families, communities are interested, willing, and committed to live together in some harmony.
It's not a descriptive thing so much as attitudes and...
Precisely.
Interesting.
Precisely.
Interesting.
So this is for the first time we are conducting such a research, and I'd like immediately to know that this is a partnership initiative. We have worked with several very prominent foundations, think tanks, and organizations. So we experienced a lot of constructive contributions and collaboration. And this is an effort which I believe will be very, very valuable and useful for not only politicians and government officials in terms of its results, but also for the wider society.
So what was the answer in terms of attitudes and understanding of the social implications of this economic divide? Is there readiness to do something?
Well, on a positive note, overall, the research has found that there is a very high potential for social cohesion in the country.
There is a high
potential. There is a high potential, especially at the level of individuals, families, neighborhoods, and communities. However, and unfortunately, this potential is largely and severely underutilized beyond the boundaries of a household.
And informal connections.
Correct. So there is lack of local ownership when it comes to a willingness towards contributing to the production of common public goods, for example, common space, or when it comes to meaningfully engaging in local planning and implementation activities.
And you would say the same thing regardless of which income bracket you were talking to? The low and the high?
Absolutely.
Same.
The sample involved 3,200 respondents of age over 18. So
countrywide.
Countrywide. So this is a representative sample, and these results pertain to different groups in terms of their social status, in terms of their income status. So this is more or less general perception in terms of lack of ownership and lack of commitment to get engaged. But there is another side of the coin, or rather the flip side of the coin. People are acknowledging the need for change. However, they demonstrated how should I put it, a lack of proactive attitude.
Lack of?
Proactive attitude. They said, yes, we need change, yes, we need our status to improve, our well-being to improve, but this should be done by somebody else, not by us.
Again, I'm going to ask whether it's the same between the rich and the poor. Years ago, I interviewed a very well-known, very important businessman with huge political connections. And I said to him, you know, this huge, beautiful, big car that you have, one of 7 at that time he had. I said, you're still driving it down these streets that aren't paved, right? And you're still sending your kids to school with the kids whose shoes are all holy, right? How do we reconcile those? And he didn't have an answer. Were the rich talking to you? Did they respond?
Yes, they did. And more or less they're sharing the same perceptions, which is interesting because their social and economic status is different from those who are deprived, who are poor, who are vulnerable.
Their mindset is different. Their
hope
is different.
It looks like that they also prefer to not to be in the driver's seat, so to speak, when it comes to social change and transformation.
So if we want to arrive at a one-line conclusion, is it fair to say that the ground is ripe for the right leaders to make the right policies?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well,
but you know, when we speak about policies, when we speak about leaders, we have to be cognizant of the fact that what is currently, in a way, missing is this broad range menu of options. If we want the right leaders to make the right policies, they have to be well informed and have to be provided with many different options in order for them to decide which are best fit for the country and for the particular context.
Well, I won't do a plug for Civilitas at this point because we absolutely agree with you, believe that, and that's what we try to do. Let's talk a little bit about environment. I know that you support several, sustainable development programs here in Armenia that also take environment in consideration, and that the UN as a whole is also really focusing on the Rio summit this year. How do we work in countries like ours in order to reconcile environmental concerns, economic concerns, and basic lifestyle choices? How do we do this?
Well, let me start by giving you a very brief background in order to put this question into perspective. The quest for sustainable development has a history of more than 40 years. The first UN summit on environment was organized back in 1972 in Stockholm. And at that time, the discussion was around how much growth is a healthy growth for the environment. And at that time, the model of zero economic growth proposed by the Rome Club was at the center of the discussion. Should we grow at all or should we not? Obviously, this was not a solution because poor countries and developing countries, they needed at that time, and they still need growth in order to improve the way their people are living. Then, 20 years after the Stockholm conference, again in Rio, UN organized another global summit called Environment and Development. And the attempt was exactly what you have asked me, to reconcile the three main pillars of sustainable development: social, economic, and environment. And the main outcome of this summit was the so-called Agenda 21, or the blueprint for development in 21st century. And the call was, we need to move away from the conventional growth model and adopt sustainable development model. Today, 20 years after Rio, we're still discussing how we could do this, how we could induce and facilitate a paradigm shift.
Especially in this global economic environment.
Precisely. And maybe because of the crisis, maybe because of the daunting challenges, including the climate change and many other issues, which are global issues, the world and the UN have recognized that it's now the time. It's now the time to act and move away from what has been the growth drive for so many years, measured mainly by economic indicators, to something different, which will look at issues like equity, equality, and also sustainability.
It seems to me one of the things that has to be done in these discussions is to provide the vocabulary, the strategic thinking that societies like ours can adopt. Because those of us who just instinctively believe and feel that environment is not just important because it's important, but also can in fact be reconciled, especially when you're talking about a country this big. There must be a way, and yet our civic activists don't have those strategic tools. Our public at large doesn't have the wherewithal, the knowledge, the capacity, the vocabulary to say, it is possible. If you're talking tourism, that's environment. If you're talking agricultural development, that's environment. Everything we talk about has an environmental implication, but we don't have the tools to talk it and to develop it.
Absolutely, I could not agree more with you. And what I would like to emphasize is that sustainability is neither exclusively nor even primarily an environmental issue. It is about how we choose to live our life. because everything we do today has consequences for our children and grandchildren. So if indeed we would like to live at least the same quality of life for our children in the near future, we need to think twice how we treat the environment and how much we make an effort to internalize the so-called environmental externalities. And this all has to do with policies.
Which means what? Internalize the environmental externalities?
Which means to cost the damage we do to the environment when we are producing cars or electricity or anything else. So that we are fully aware that there is no free lunch, like the economists used to say, and environment has its cost.
Okay, but the flip side of that is, I remember when we were immigrants in the United States, and in school they would teach us, save the bottles and the glass and the plastic and don't throw them away. And my father, the new immigrant to America, said, "Are you kidding? I came to America so I would save old bottles." Now we have a society that is just experiencing economic growth, barely, and now you want them to not use plastics and not use bottles, and it's kind of counterintuitive.
Therefore, it's so important, as you've mentioned in your question, to find the right tools, to find the language, and to come up with a far-reaching awareness campaign which will explain to the people why it is so important. What is the benefit of not using the plastic bottles? What you'll gain if you don't use it, and what you'll lose if you continue using the plastic bottles. So everything is about broadening up the mindset and changing up the mindset of people.
Thank you for participating in this conversation, because that's what we're trying to do. So thank you again.
My pleasure.
Our guest is Ms. Dafina Gercheva of the United Nations. She's the United Nations resident representative here in Armenia.